James Mall. I am the Search Advisory Chair for the university, and we're pleased to have Dr. Mary Gutierrez with us today. And with that introduction, if I could please turn it over to Mary, give us an opener, and then we can take questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I just want to start off by thanking so much you all for welcoming me to your campus, for your hospitality, and for what I know is a big lift. It is exciting to come back from having been remote for such a long time. And there's a lot of work involved in hosting your first chancellor candidate on campus. So I just want to say thank you so much to the team that has made that happen. And it is lovely to be here with all of you. Exciting to see 44 people showing up for this talk. And I am looking forward to the time and the opportunity that we would get to meet in person. So I'll start off by telling you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to be really happy to be answering questions that you may have for me. Right now, thank you. I live in California, and I came up Friday night so that I could spend Saturday and Sunday here in Taos, and just really getting a sense of this place and of the space and the community, and spending time just kind of orienting myself. And I think that having spent some time here in the land, it would probably be a really nice and important time for me to say that to follow a custom and a practice that UNM has adopted. UNM has a practice of land acknowledgement, and having spent time in this land in particular and understanding the significance of land acknowledgement, I'd like to begin our time by saying that UNM-Taos is built on land, the original land of the Taos Pueblo, a sovereign nation that has a very deep connection to that land. And I think it's important that we honor that connection and the generations of people who have been stewards of this land, and just honor them and the land that we are on here today. So I grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico. My parents were educators, and so I grew up in a home that was really made more rich because of the presence of education in my home. The evenings that I spent there as a child were spent around the dinner table listening to my mom talk about the stories of kindergartners and her classes. And the weekends and holidays, we had my father's graduate students in the house. He was a professor of engineering at NMSU, and many of his graduate students were international students. And their presence in my home helped me learn about places that were far away that I did not know anything about, and to learn about their experiences there in their home countries, but also the experiences that they had in learning in the United States. And it was that environment that really nurtured me and also gave me just a love for education, although I had no intention of being an educator. When I went to college, I went through about 4 majors before I landed on my final major as an English major. I'm hoping that some of you are thinking that she could have used some career advisement. I could have, but I probably had already been training for a long time to become an educator. As I said, I was an English major, and in my sophomore year, I had my first opportunity to be working in a high school. And my supervising teacher asked me if I would teach vocabulary and spelling. And that experience transformed my sense of what it means to be an educator. Prior to that, I thought that teaching was really about the teacher and the content. And that experience transformed my perspective, and I came to understand that teaching is really about students and creating an environment in which students are highly likely to discover things on their own, to learn, and to become empowered by education. And that is what informed my work as an educator, that I realized that it was my responsibility to create that environment to create the likelihood that students would learn on their own, and that I could do that by having 10 ways to teach any concept, by knowing what my individual students were, what they were experiencing in my classroom, and taking ownership for the outcome, that was my responsibility. As I said, I loved teaching, but I also became increasingly frustrated when I saw students who had been successful in my classroom face barriers outside of my classroom. And that was really what pulled me into administration, my desire to confront those barriers with colleagues who were also interested in what I would later come to frame as dismantling the systematic racism and other biases that are inherent in higher education. And that does define the work that I have been doing for my career, and is in part what brings me here today, because I see that UNM-Taos is an institution that is also very much committed to removing those barriers and producing equitable outcomes, for taking responsibility for producing those outcomes. And it's that value that we share in serving our students and serving our students equitably that really attracts me to working with you. A couple of the other things that are exciting to me about the work that your next chancellor has and that you are engaging in is that I see that you have been an institution that has been changing rapidly in terms of the number of students that you've served, in the rates of success and retention that you have accomplished with your students, and in your drive towards increasing the retention and graduation rates that your students are accomplishing, and that you're accomplishing in partnership with them. I am excited by the fact that you're a small campus, because I think that small campuses can be powerful. I think that is so, there's so much power in a small group really deciding to have a single vision, to become student-centered and to empower each other to serve students better. I also love the fact that the community is small, so we have a really clear sense of who our partners are, who our K-12 partners are, who our transfer partners are, and who our community partners are in terms of employers, in terms of workforce, and in terms of really critical supports for the work that we're doing. So I think that there's a lot that is very much ideal about the position that you are in terms of serving your community, and that is ideal for a chancellor who's really interested in engaging with a college that is doing that work and is ready to resume that work in a post-COVID environment, but also to challenge itself to meet new ambitious goals. And so with that quick little introduction, I think I'll stop there, James, and
Yes.
have some time for questions.
Questions, please. Let's have a conversation. If you're comfortable posting questions to the chat in writing, please.
What is my personal take on community building as it relates to,
Gonna open it back up.
there we go,
Hey, good, good.
as it relates to education and student diversity? Yeah, so I think that it's community building really begins with being in conversation with your students. I think an opportunity for us as educators is to co-construct a learning environment. And what that means is that we spend time listening and building in partnership with our students. And I think that that's a basis for community building, giving students the opportunity to engage with us in making this space their space and our space to be learning together. I think it calls on us to listen and to understand our students, to some of the best work I think that I've had the opportunity to do in education began with focus groups, where we were very intent on listening to our students and listening to our students talk about their experiences, help us understand their experiences, their wants and their needs. which I think is very different than sometimes imagining what our students want and need. Giving students the space and the opportunity to talk with us about that is a great place to begin. And then to actually empower our students to partner with us in building that community and making sure that the ways that they are imagining their educational experience and what we are doing in application are aligned. I think that those are a couple of ways that you can begin to really build community for students in the campus. Okay, so the second question asked, how would I address barriers to engagement between local employers and educators? And as context, our students in some cases would like to find jobs locally. Others may want to advance in their chosen fields with local employers. So I think that, that I don't know exactly what the barriers are right now to engagement with local employers. I think that one of the most important things for us to do is to show up and to initiate those conversations. And certainly there are places that those conversations happen with the chambers, but also for me as a new member to your community, it would mean a lot of face time in the community, building relationships, listening to needs and listening to interests, and beginning to understand what it looks like from the employer side to build a relationship with us. What does informal mentorship mean to me? How would that be reflected in the way that you approach your position at UNM-Taos? Mentorship is one of my favorite things about being an educator. In terms of one of the ways that I will start conversations with people that I am working with is really to ask them about their interests, their goals, and the ways that I can be supportive to them in reaching those. I think it's really important that as a leader, I am supporting a growing and learning environment for the faculty and staff and administration at UNM-Taos. I think that when we are setting up the opportunity for all of us to be our best selves, to understand what types of supports we need, and that's a beginning place for mentorship, but to always make sure that that conversation is continuing. I think that mentorship relies on conversation, on understanding and building trust. There are people that I have current mentoring relationships with, and I think the more time that we spend together, the deeper we're able to go with those mentoring relationships. But it comes from being invited into the relationship, to my mentee opening up to me and talking with me about challenges, and me being willing to listen and provide ideas and support. That support is really important. So when somebody asks me, messages me on LinkedIn and asks, what should my approach be in seeking this job or resolving this problem, it's important that I have that follow through and provide that feedback for that person. Is the adjunct instructor question the next?
Yes.
Okay. So what ideas do I have to support adjunct instructors? One of my, I think a kind of a basic philosophy about adjunct instructors is that when a student walks into your class, your student doesn't necessarily know if you are working with the institution in a part-time capacity or a full-time capacity. You are their teacher. They're the person that you are the person that they are looking to, and the person that they're desiring to make a connection with. And so I think it's, for me, as I'm entering into this work and the work that I'm doing, I care very much about the experience of adjunct instructors and full-time instructors, because we're all really critical to student success. In terms of that support, I think the very most important thing for part-time instructors, for adjunct instructors, is to know that you are an important and valued part of our community, and that we need to deliver on that in a lot of important ways, in terms of communication, in terms of opportunity for input, in terms of professional development. in terms of decision making. All of those are really important aspects to enrich your experience as an adjunct instructor. Next question. What reputation, rumors, or conceptions do I have of Taos? That's awesome. And how would that make you feel about living and working here? Peter, I will have to tell you that I'm not a person who, you know, reputations of what other people have to say doesn't necessarily influence my perception. As I have been going through the interview process with UNM-Taos, I think that one of the things that people have heard me say a lot is that my goal is to show up and listen. And so my response to that would be to say, you know, what do you want me to know about Taos? As I said, I've spent a couple of days here, and there's certainly things that I can observe about aspects of the community in terms of divides of wealth, in terms of different communities that are all existing here in Taos. And I guess additionally, it seems like that even within that very superficial divide that I just described, there are also people who've been here for a very, very long time, who seem to be very invested in the community. And I think that those are the folks that I'm actually spending more time with throughout the interview process. And so I think that the types of observations that I've been making are that there are people here who seem to have a very significant investment in the community and in the institution itself. And they seem to be invested, caring, and important partners in the work. Okay. In my previous roles, what kind of collaborations have I had with institutional research? As UNM-Taos Chancellor, what is my vision for institutional research? And what are my thoughts regarding data equity? And if I can ask, can you tell me more about what you mean by data equity? I just want to make sure I'm understanding your intention. I would love, Alejandra, if you wanted to unmute and tell me.
Yes, hi, Dr. Gutierrez. What I mean is basically, you know, looking at data from the perspective of being not objective and also constructed the way, say, qualitative data is perceived, that it is people who manufacture data, it is people who analyze data and decide what research questions are worth pursuing, how do you analyze them, what do you emphasize or not. And so in that terms, how do you see the role of IR in advancing race and equity issues in higher education?
Thank you for expanding on that. That's helpful. So one of the things that I've been talking a lot about during the interview is that I think that it's important for us as we are pursuing major initiatives to do that in a way that is data informed. And what data informed looks like can really be significantly, it can vary. Whether it's something where we're looking at disaggregated success rates in a course, or we are looking at who is receiving resources, who's pursuing tutoring, for example, and starting with that data to inform the work and having a sense of what we want the data to look like on the other end. I think that the question, Alejandra, that you asked it really calls out the fact that very often when we're starting with data, what we need to do is really ask some questions of that. And I love it when we're able to pair quantitative and qualitative data. So I think that focus groups can tell us so much and can be a really important next step as we are advancing the work. In terms of the relationship with IR, I think it's really critical that we know our own data. And I I do like the fact that you're pointing out that that we have a relationship with data, right? That we can guide data by the questions that we're asking. So we have to be very aware of that. And I think that it gives us an opportunity to ask those questions ourselves and to kind of interrogate the questions we're asking in the same way that we interrogate the data to make sure that the conclusions or the ideas that we're developing about our data are sound, and we have some level of agreement about that. Okay, so Pamela has asked, so thanking me for my time, and then stated that I wanted to confront barriers. What are some approaches that I've taken to dismantle them? I think that one of the approaches that I've taken to dismantle them is to start with the data, to particularly look at equity gaps and to hold ourselves responsible for those gaps, to make sure that we are looking at data that's disaggregated. And sometimes I think that when we're looking at data that's intersectional, so when we're maybe looking at data that is broken down by racial group, but then integrated with other identities that students may have. So looking at poverty and race, or looking at LGBTQIA identity and race, or vet status, we start to see, or gender, we start to see other patterns that help us understand the barriers that we're trying to address. But starting with data, to make ourselves aware of them, and then I think informing ourselves with research, because very often the problems that we are trying to confront are problems that our colleagues in other places share, that maybe research has been done in other places to help understand that, and to begin to build a basis for understanding that can then inform the work that we're doing. Additionally, I think that talking with our students and hearing our students' stories can also compel people who may not be moved by the data or the research to begin to make changes as they hear what their students' experiences are and are really motivated to respond to them. And then finally, having a sense of models and approaches that other people have used with some success can help build a bridge to confronting some of those barriers, as well as having communities of practice or other extended professional development opportunities, which I think is more likely to result in lasting change. All right, so Brandy has asked, UNM-Taos has many contracts and grants serving pre-college students and community members that may not ever become UNM-Taos. The community members, and pre-college students. Okay, so what are my thoughts about the role of community college in community building? And so I would say that I think that if we talk about the pre-college students, sometimes I think that we build these relationships, build out dual credit programs with the intentionality that we are hoping that many of our students are going to pursue educational opportunities at UNM-Taos, knowing that some of them may not. And that part of what we can be doing is really building a college-going culture and expectations in parts of a community where that may not be taken for granted. But as we start to develop those patterns, and that pattern of taking college classes in 11th grade and in 12th grade, we can really start to see more students matriculating and becoming college students, even if they are not coming to UNM-Taos, and seeing that as a win for the community. I do think that there are opportunities to knit together resources in addition to dual credit that can increase matriculation to UNM-Taos that can be important complements to what you're describing there. All right, so Brooke has said, I've been thanking me. Oh, why am I, so as I mentioned, I live in California, and Brooke says, why are you considering a move to a small isolated town in northern New Mexico where poverty and isolation meet 22% of the state meets the federal poverty level? Well, and so I think that the answer is in part of your question, because I'm interested in doing that work. When I see UNM-Taos as an institution that is interested in engaging and serving this population. That interests me. As I mentioned, the small size of the campus, I believe, gives us an opportunity to really focus and agree on how we're moving forward together. And so, you know, I will simply say that California has challenges all of its own. So it may be that you know, at this point in my career, I am making choices about where I hope to have impact with an institution that wants to have impact, with an institution that really wants to serve its community and serve its community equitably. And I see that UNM-Taos is an opportunity to do that. Certainly that work is happening in California too, and in large institutions where presidents tend to stay 3 years, possibly 5. And I know that the research shows us that chancellors, presidents are not really able to make significant changes when they're providing leadership for those short periods of time. That has become the culture in California. And it's not something that I'm interested in doing. I don't want to spend 3 years getting to know a college only to be moving on to another place in 3 more years and another place in 3 more years. And there are some systemic reasons that turnover is happening. It's not simply because presidents are choosing to move. Here I see that chancellors stay with their institution they tend to stay a longer period of time. And I think that has more promise for impact. I want the years that I'm doing this work to be effective. I want to be struggling against challenges like poverty, or challenges like inequity, or challenges like college going culture. I want to be struggling against that to be making a change, rather than struggling against a culture of turnover in higher education. All right. Can I elaborate on my knowledge of or experience with dual enrollment in rural communities in the Southwest United States? So I can talk a lot about dual enrollment. And I'll tell you that my very first experience with dual enrollment came as I was leading an early college that was among the first, it was in the first cohort of the Bill and Melinda Gates early college work. And the work that we were doing in that institution was with primarily first generation students, a fairly diverse group of students. Many of the students were first generation immigrants to the US as well. And I certainly learned a lot about how to really effectively serve that student population and engage them in higher education. The work that we were doing there was interdisciplinary, team taught, and students were engaging in projects with our community partners where they were doing real work that the community partners needed that was serving as a capstone to the coursework that they were engaged in. So for example, when our students were taking an environmental chemistry class and a political science class, they may have been lobbying in the state capitol on the topic that they were studying. So for example, this was a time when there was about to be a ban on throwing batteries out just with your trash because they would leach into the water and then pollute the waterways. Our students were choosing a lobbyist group to work with. We're choosing a bill to follow. Sometimes they were writing white papers. Sometimes they were talking to legislatures. But all of that learning environment created a much higher sense of engagement in the learning, ownership of the learning. Students in some cases were building portfolios that would become part of the work that they were demonstrating that they could do if they didn't transfer, but went directly into the workforce, particularly in in website design. So, you know, I think that some of the things that I learned there, I would certainly would inform my work here, because I do believe that contextualized learning creates a higher sense of engagement. It helps students understand why they're learning what they're learning, because they're able to use it. And it changes their perception of themselves, because they are partners with a community organization. They take their work to another level because it's real work. It's not something that they're handing in to me that's going to sit on my desk and be thrown away at the end of the term. Yes. So Montserrat asked, how would I support our immigrant documented and undocumented students enrolling in UNM-Taos and creating career pathways and opportunities for them? This is certainly work that is critical work in the state of California, and it is fairly traditional that all of our colleges have Dreamer Centers or DACA support centers, so that our students have a place to come and ask questions and feel safe in asking questions, and provide resources that are essentially authoritative, so that they know that the information that they're getting is reliable information. In terms of supporting the work of these students and the career pathways, I think that certainly it's really critical that we have a lot of transparency about what career pathways look like. And I think that some of the information from partners is really about building out career ladders. So helping students understand stages of careers and understanding what kind of education they need to have to achieve an initial level of a career ladder, and how they can educate up to that and continue their relationship with education to come up to prepare for the second level of a career ladder, and then to continue that relationship with higher education to advance a career. And when we build partnerships that really articulate those career ladders to educational opportunities, we can see a lot of success in helping people change their employment outcomes. Great. So Nina has asked, what do I see as being most needed for a college in a poor rural community where we've talked about the high levels of poverty, where students are not yet college ready? How does community college need to pivot to these needs? And can I describe that vision, and how does that vision expand beyond degree seeking students? So that beyond degree seeking is really important. So I think that that it's very important that we have certificates, that we have small unit certificates that are actually meaningful in terms of the career sector that the student is working in. So for example, a ServSafe certification is a certificate that's really meaningful for someone who's working in food service, and getting ServSafe and getting other certificates that really help someone advance a career in food service. The same kind of thing can happen in hospitality. And so I'll talk with you about a program that I did have the opportunity to support the development of in working with partners in the hotel industry who had really, they thought, valuable employees who had low language confidence and needed to build more customer service skills in English. But folks who were doing really well in the jobs that they were doing in industry, we partnered to work with some of these hotels. We also had we had access to Hilton curriculum that was about customer service, and we were working with an ESL instructor who specialized in vocational ESL. We brought all of this together to work with the partners, to work with folks who are currently employed, or who wanted to work in that industry to build the language skills, the interaction skills, and the ease and comfort with using English to interact with guests. And what we found in this very successful program was that employees were accelerating their careers during the time that they were in this semester-long program, because it was so contextualized, so appropriate to what their skill level was and how we could help them advance in their career. All right, Roberta asked, where do I see myself in 5 or 10 years? And so Roberta, that is exactly my point about why I would be moving to UNM-Taos for this position, because I see that chancellors in the system tend to stay in their jobs for 5 to 10 years. So my intention is to have that very long goal of building a long relationship with my next, with my college. And I see that has been the history here for the most part at UNM-Taos, and that's part of what attracts me to this position. Great. What do I believe, Victoria asked, what do I believe the role of a community college is in terms of providing adult literacy education, not only for students who are pursuing their high school equivalency, a specific career pathway or higher education, but for community members with diverse literacy goals. And New Mexico ties for having the lowest adult literacy levels in the nation. This is the mission of a community college, is to be addressing that, to be in places where there is adult education opportunities in the K-12 system, to be partnering there, and where that does not exist, then to be providing that. And I think it's really critical, because if we're able to increase the level of literacy in homes, that benefits not only the adult who is pursuing that education, but it benefits the entire home for a number of different reasons. So I think that is really critical to the mission of a community college. All right. Kylie has asked, what experience do I have with adult education students who may have exited the public school system before graduating, students who are learning English, or students with low literacy skills? And what's my familiarity with integrated education and training and the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act? So I am not positive that I'm familiar with the IET or WIOA, I'm guessing. I'm not positive that I'm familiar with those. I do have a lot of experience in supporting adult education. In one of my previous positions in California, when I was dean at Skyline College, I supported the adult education block grant. And what that grant required was that the community college work in deep collaboration with our adult education partners. It was, so we're definitely working with students who are still improving English language skills, and students who were pursuing high school equivalency or preparing to pursue high school equivalency because they may not have been at that level. And what we found is that the partnerships were really critical to success, and that building out those partnerships not only helped students complete the process that they were going through in adult education, but then also matriculate into the community college because of that articulation, because of that teamwork, and because we were committed to that partnership and to the shared success of those students.
So if I could just pause for a moment. Dr. Gutierrez has been doing a lot of speaking. I want to do a brief time check. We have about 10 more minutes until we wrap up with this session. There are several additional questions in the chat. There were a few also that were submitted ahead of time that we'd like to get to as well. So maybe we'll get to 1 or 2 more in the chat, and then address a couple that were submitted ahead of time, and then give Dr. Gutierrez a few moments to give the closing statement.
Okay.
While she catches her breath and maybe has a sip of water. Okay, so we'll move on to this next question. Thank you.
Okay. So Alexis asked if I can tell about a specific time where I was able to strengthen my institution's connections to community resources and community members in order to support a local college culture and presence. Okay, and what sort of strategies did we use and how might that apply to Taos and UNM-Taos? So I can think about a couple of examples. When I was talking about the early college, we built out ongoing relationships with 13 community partners. And it was important that those were ongoing because there's a lot of startup cost in building those partnerships. But it helped us learn about our community partners and their culture. And it helped them learn about us and learn really what kinds of projects they could be working with us on that were going to work really well for both institutions. Another thing that I'll share with you about is a longstanding learning community that I've had the opportunity to be part of, which is called Puente, which serves Latino students, Latinx students, Latino students in California. And you know, part of the reason that I call out this particularly is because it's a really culturally relevant learning community. A lot of the work that students do in those courses is very is contextualized around a Latino experience in the U.S. Particularly looking at history, looking at ethnic studies, and looking at literature. Coursework is really selected because of having that cultural perspective, but is also something where families are very much involved in the learning communities. So a lot of the celebrations and the events that happen are welcoming of family members, and recognizing that family members are important support. And it's important to help our family members understand what it means for students to be in college. Part of what happens in that is we really build more culture and more likelihood that more folks in the families would be engaging in higher education. We've also taken that learning community that started at the two-year institution and built up a network into the four-year institution and into high schools. And that piece into the high schools is really important too, in terms of helping the students that we were talking about before, dual credit students, that we really want to make sure transfer to the institution. That learning community extension into the high school is a way to help encourage that matriculation. All right.
Perhaps we'll end with that last question in the chat. We do have a question that was presented ahead of time from Dr. Debbie Ragland. She's our faculty member in STEM geology and environmental science. And she asks, if you could talk to your experience working with legislators, trying to convince them of the importance of branch campus education in somewhat remote areas, in this case, New Mexico.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
So the work that I have done with legislators in the past has been really about helping them understand what community colleges are bringing to students. And very often that message just comes home so much more strong when we are bringing students and we're telling student stories. And part of that is that I think that folks get hit with data and with numbers and with research often, but when they have an opportunity to meet a student and a student whose story is compelling and really encapsulates the story of so many of our students, I think that a lot of times that's where we really change minds. It's clear to me that UNM-Taos needs to have, am I done? Oh, okay. Needs to have relationships with the other branch campuses and with UNM to bring big asks to legislators. And it's also critically important that I would have relationships with legislators as well, because there's sometimes that those big asks don't get quite the traction that a single ask can make. And I know that you have buildings that are being funded because of that relationship and that single ask that really moves something that maybe didn't get moved forward in one bill, but did advance in another. So it would be really important to me to network and to build those relationships and to use the existing relationships that you have, but leverage them powerfully on behalf of our students.
We have one more prepared question sent in by a staff member from Amber Gordon from our Center for Academic Success and Achievement, CASA. And Amber asks, how do you foster collaboration and communication between staff, faculty, and students?
I think that one of the most important ways to really foster that communication is to demonstrate that at the highest level. So for me, to be able to demonstrate that I'm listening to and hearing and interested in the perspectives of all of the folks who are at the institution. And when I'm able to demonstrate that and build a culture of valuing perspectives, respecting perspectives, and including and acting on those perspectives, I think that that starts to inform the culture as a whole. And that's been one of the ways that I have actually contributed to cultural change in institutions where there wasn't that same kind of balanced interest and respect for all folks.
So the last question, we'll go back to the chat from Victoria Santos de Gonzalez. What is your leadership style? And if you are the successful candidate, how do you see yourself spending your first 6 months at UNM-Taos?
Yes. So I think that they're really two important and things that need to happen early on. I think that providing a clear sense of what it looks like for us to return to campus is really important. I think that even in states where there is really explicit and clear direction on what it means to return to campus, we still have to have local direction about, we're going to have wipes at the door over here, or you know what, we don't need to be providing wipes as much as we had thought we needed to, but providing that very clear direction on what it looks like for us to return to campus, and doing that in such a manner that people feel safe and confident about returning to campus. I think a second thing is beginning to spend my time getting to know you and listening. And I think that that's a really, really important first step in the rest of the work that we would be doing, is building that relationship, me learning from you, listening to you, and understanding your needs, concerns, and interests.
So the very last, most important question you might ever face this whole day of interviews and forums is, Kathleen Pinot, their library director, wants to know, red or green?
Christmas.
I
don't want to choose.
Excellent answer.
Yes.
Dr. Gutierrez will give you a few moments to make any closing statements. Before you do, I just want to thank all of our faculty, staff, students, and community members for joining us today. If you are interested, you are welcome to attend the next public session that begins at 3 p.m. The registration is required. Please refer to your email that was sent out at 8 o'clock this morning. If you have not yet registered, you could do so at the link provided there. I also in the chat provided a link to a feedback questionnaire that the Provost Holloway will be is encouraging folks to provide feedback on the candidates. And so we encourage you to visit that survey and fill that out. And with just a couple minutes, Dr. Gutierrez, any last closing statements?
I'm overwhelmed by the questions because to me, they are just an articulation of your care. And that is why I'm so interested in working with you. I love the fact that you are making sure that I am explicitly aware of the challenges that you face in serving your communities and your absolute commitment to doing that. So I just, I'm taking these questions, Peter, as information about this community, and I really am appreciating what I'm seeing here. So thank you so much for the work that you're engaged in, and thank you so much for showing up and engaging me in our first communication and conversation. I certainly hope to be here in person with you in the fall, and just thank you so much for spending your time with me today.